She came ready to provoke him, but Barack Obama didn't take the bait. He simply smiled, waited, and then spoke. And in that single moment, calm stepped onto the stage and never left. It began like any other television debate. Polite smiles, warm greetings, and the familiar remarks about how nice it was to be there. But the calm atmosphere didn't last long. Anyone watching could sense that something bigger was about to unfold. The stage looked flawless. Bright studio lights glowed softly, casting a warm golden tone across the table where Barack Obama and Ivanka Trump sat facing each other. Between them sat the moderator, a host known for keeping conversations civil when discussions started to heat up. The topic of the evening was simple on the surface, yet heavy with meaning: leadership in modern America. Obama looked exactly the way people remembered him: calm, composed, and quietly confident. His posture was relaxed, his smile gentle, and his eyes carried the patience of someone who had faced years of pressure. He didn't seem like a man trying to prove anything. His presence alone carried authority. Ivanka, meanwhile, appeared polished and self-assured. Her hair was perfectly styled, her tones smooth and deliberate. She carried herself like someone who had carefully prepared what she wanted to say and believed every word of it. For her, this wasn't just another debate. It was an opportunity to defend her family's reputation and her father's legacy as president. The moderator opened with light conversation. Obama chuckled softly at a joke about how he seemed to age slower than most presidents. Ivanka responded with a polite smile, adding that her father often said the job gave him energy rather than exhaustion. At first, the exchange felt relaxed, the kind of easy conversation that keeps audiences comfortable before the real discussion begins. But beneath those smiles, there was tension. You could feel it in the pauses, in the way their eyes met just a little too long. There was history in that room. Political rivalry, pride, and two completely different visions of what leadership truly meant. The moderator turned toward Obama first. "Mr. President," he began, "you've spoken many times about the importance of character in leadership. What does that mean to you?" Obama nodded slightly, taking a moment to think before speaking. When he did, his voice was calm but firm. "I think character," he said, "is what you do when no one's watching. It's how you treat people who can't offer you anything in return." A few audience members nodded. Light applause followed. Ivanka listened carefully, maintaining that practiced smile as she waited for her turn. The moderator then shifted toward her. "Miss Trump, you've often said your father taught you leadership through action. How would you describe his approach?" Ivanka's smile widened. "My father believes in results," she said confidently. "He believes leadership isn't about long speeches or perfectly chosen words. It's about taking bold steps even when people don't understand you." Her words lingered in the air, clearly contrasting Obama's thoughtful, measured leadership style. Obama didn't react. He simply kept his eyes on her, listening quietly, his expression neutral, sensing the comparison. The moderator leaned forward slightly. "So you're saying leadership means taking action, if it means being misunderstood?" Ivanka nodded. "Exactly. Some leaders spend more time talking about unity than actually building it. My father doesn't wait for everyone to agree before doing what he believes is right." A quiet murmur moved through the audience. The atmosphere had shifted. Ivanka had chosen her words carefully, but everyone understood the implication. Obama offered a small, polite smile. "That's one way to look at it," he said softly, and then he stopped there. The moderator let out an awkward chuckle, trying to ease the tension. "Well, it's nice to hear both perspectives tonight." But the tension had already settled into the room. Ivanka leaned back slightly, crossing her legs. She glanced briefly at Obama with a faint smirk, one that could have meant confidence, amusement, or perhaps a challenge. She was ready to push further. Then came the next question. "What do you think?" the moderator asked. "Is the biggest difference between your father's leadership and President Obama's?" Ivanka's smile sharpened. "I think my father leads from the front," she said. "He doesn't hide behind words. Some people build legacies through speeches and memoirs, while others build them through action. The mood in the room changed instantly. This wasn't just political commentary anymore. It was personal. A soft gasp spread through the audience as people realized she had just taken a direct shot at Obama's post-presidential life, suggesting that his accomplishments were little more than speeches and books. Obama didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head slightly, looking at her with calm curiosity, almost as if he was inviting her to continue. Ivanka misread his silence as hesitation, so she kept going. It's easy to sound wise when you're no longer the one making the difficult decisions, she added. My father doesn't have that luxury. He faces those choices every single day. The audience fell completely silent. Even the moderator seemed unsure whether to interrupt. For a brief moment, it looked as if Ivanka had claimed the upper hand. Her expression said everything: confident, certain, proud. Obama remained perfectly still, no reaction, no rebuttal. His hands rested loosely together in front of him as he continued, watching her calmly. Those few seconds of silence felt far longer than they actually were. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to respond. But he didn't, not yet. Instead, he simply smiled. A calm, knowing smile, one that suggested he was saving his answer for exactly the right moment. It was the kind of smile that seemed to say, "You think you've cornered me, but you've just handed me the key." The audience didn't realize it yet, but that quiet patience was the calm before the storm. Obama wasn't ignoring the insult. He was preparing the moment. And when he finally decided to speak, the entire conversation would turn. The tension inside the studio thickened like gathering clouds. What had started as a respectful discussion was now filled with an unspoken challenge. Ivanka had made her argument action over words, and she knew it had landed. The corners of her lips lifted slightly, a smile that blended confidence with calculation. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The moderator sensed a spark, but not yet a fire. So he turned back to Obama. "Mr. President," he asked, "how do you respond to the idea that some leaders talk about change while others actually make it happen?" Obama took a slow, measured breath. His hands remained loosely folded, his voice steady and calm. "Real change," he said quietly, "doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it happens quietly when no one's watching, in classrooms, hospitals, or small towns. Leadership isn't just what you do for people who agree with you. It's what you do for those who don't." Several people in the audience nodded, but before the atmosphere could soften, Ivanka jumped back in. She wasn't about to let the moment drift away. "With all due respect," she said, her tone controlled but edged with something sharper. "That sounds nice. But people don't live off words, they live off results. My father built things. Real things. Businesses, jobs, opportunity. He didn't just inspire hope. He created it." The moderator glanced between them, certain if the discussion was moving too close to open confrontation. Obama didn't react. His stillness made the air feel even tighter. Ivanka misread that silence as hesitation, maybe even weakness, and decided to push further. She crossed one leg over the other and looked directly at him. "You know," she continued, "some people say leadership is about grace. But grace doesn't pay the bills. Maybe that's why so many people felt left behind during your time in office. You spoke beautifully, but where was the real change?" A murmur spread through the audience. That line landed hard. It wasn't just policy criticism anymore. It was personal. She was challenging his legacy, his reputation, even his connection to everyday people. She was daring him to respond. Obama remained silent, his eyes fixed calmly on her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the quiet made it seem like she might have struck a nerve. Sensing momentum, Ivanka continued, "You know, Mr. President, it's easy to look calm and wise when you're no longer in the spotlight, when you're not the one making the tough calls. My father doesn't have that luxury. He doesn't get to just talk about hope. He has to deliver it." Her words were sharp, though wrapped in a tone that pretended respect. She turned toward the moderator with a proud smile, as if silently declaring victory. "I think we've heard strong points from both sides," the moderator said with an uneasy chuckle, attempting to ease the tension. but no one was listening to him. All eyes were on Obama. Everyone wanted to see how he would respond. He didn't, at least not immediately. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost amused. Like a teacher listening to a confident student who had just made a mistake. He shifted slightly in his chair, still calm, still composed. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, allowing it to fill the room. Ivanka noticed. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The pause was lasting longer than she expected. The confident smile she wore began to feel more like a mask. She wasn't used to silence. She was used to fast rebuttals and quick exchanges. Obama's quiet forced her own words to echo back into the room, heavier than when she had spoken them. Finally, he leaned forward slightly. "Ivanka," he said in a low, even voice, "you mentioned results, and you're right, results matter." He paused briefly. "But what kind of results are we talking about?" His tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "A leader can build towers. Open offices make profits," he continued. "But if those results only serve a few, is that leadership, or is it self-interest dressed up as achievement?" Ivanka started to respond, but Obama continued before she could interrupt. "You said your father built things, and that's true. But real leadership isn't about building things for yourself. It's about building trust. Trust," he added softly, "is something money can't buy." A wave of quiet applause rippled through the audience. Ivanka's smile faltered. Obama's words were smooth and unhurried, yet each one landed with quiet precision. Then he paused again, giving her space just enough to believe she could regain control. Ivanka straightened slightly and tilted her head. "With respect, Mr. President," she said, "maybe people are tired of moral lectures. They want action. My father acts. That's why people love him." Obama smiled faintly, almost kindly. "And that's why they fear him too," said softly. That single sentence shifted the atmosphere in the room. Ivanka blinked, clearly caught off guard. Obama didn't sound angry or emotional, if anything. He sounded matter-of-fact. And that calmness made the line land even harder. Ivanka tried to laugh it off, but her voice came out thinner than before. "I wouldn't say fear," she replied quickly. "I'd say respect." Obama nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "it's difficult to tell the difference when power becomes the only goal." Another murmur spread through the audience, the energy slowly turning toward him. Ivanka opened her mouth to respond, but no words came that wouldn't sound. Defensive, for the first time that evening, her confidence slipped. She glanced toward the moderator, but he was watching Obama now too, as if waiting to see where this was heading. Obama didn't press harder. He simply leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "I understand loyalty. I respect family. But when loyalty stops you from telling the truth even to your own, that's not strength. That's surrender." The room fell completely silent. It wasn't the silence of confusion or boredom. It was the silence of realization. Ivanka's earlier jab suddenly felt smaller next to what Obama had just said. And he didn't smile or celebrate the moment. He simply looked at her with calm empathy, as if he wanted her to understand rather than feel embarrassed. But something in her composure had cracked. No one said it out loud, but everyone watching could feel it. The debate had shifted. The storm she had started was slowly turning back toward her. The air in the studio felt heavy. The quiet hum of the lights overhead filled the long pause between them. Ivanka had walked into the moment with confidence, certain of her footing. Now the silence stretched longer than she expected. Across the table, Obama remained perfectly still. He didn't look angry. He didn't look insulted. He simply looked patient. And that patience was more unsettling than any argument could have been. Ivanka shifted slightly, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve as she tried to recover the polished composure she always carried in public. She offered a faint smile, the kind meant to say, "I'm still in control." But deep down, she could feel it, that slow, creeping sense that the room was beginning to slip away from her. The moderator, hoping to steer the conversation back onto safer ground, cleared his throat. Let's bring this back to leadership, he said carefully. Both of you have talked about strength and results. But how do personal values shape those results? Can family influence the way a leader makes decisions? Ivanka seized the opportunity. She straightened in her chair and quickly found her voice again, of course. Family shapes leadership, she said with conviction. My father is the best example of that. Everything he does, every decision he makes is for his family and for the country he loves. Her voice grew more confident as she continued. He's guided by loyalty. Loyalty to the people who believe in him. Loyalty to us. And loyalty to his own values. That's what makes him a strong leader. She glanced toward Obama as she spoke, almost daring him to challenge her. But he didn't. Not yet. It's something I've always admired about him, she continued. He doesn't separate the personal from the political. His family is his foundation, his motivation. In her mind, the line sounded strong, well-practiced, and powerful. She expected applause, or at least a nod of acknowledgement, instead. Obama looked down briefly, as if quietly considering her words. When he lifted his head again, his eyes met hers, and something in that calm gaze carried weight. Family is important, he said softly. It shapes who we are. I understand that. Ivanka smiled, taking it as agreement. Exactly, she replied quickly. Family gives purpose to everything we do. But Obama's next words shifted the entire mood of the room. He leaned forward slightly and asked almost casually, Barron, is your son? The question wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it landed with surprising force. Ivanka's smile froze. The audience went still. Even the moderator looked momentarily unsure if he had heard correctly. The silence that followed felt sharp and uncomfortable, like a wire pulled too tight. Ivanka blinked, confused for a moment, before letting out a small, awkward laugh. Excuse me? She said, her voice just slightly higher than before. Obama didn't repeat the question. He simply looked at her, calm and unreadable. Ivanka quickly recovered, brushing the moment aside with practiced ease. No, she said, still smiling though. The edge in her voice had thinned. Barron is my brother. I think everyone knows that. Obama nodded slowly. Of course, he said quietly. It's just that you speak about family as if it's one shield protecting everyone around your father. I was simply wondering where that shield begins and where it ends. Ivanka opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught briefly. In her throat, a flicker of irritation rose inside her, mixed with confusion. She wasn't used to being caught off guard, trying to regain control, she said firmly. When you grow up in a family like mine, loyalty is everything. You don't separate who you are from the people you love. That's what keeps you strong. Obama smiled again, this time with quiet understanding. I respect loyalty, he said. But when loyalty starts to replace truth, it becomes something else. A soft murmur moved through the audience. Ivanka's expression tightened. I'm not sure what you're implying. Mr. President, I'm not implying anything, Obama replied calmly. Just observing. He paused briefly before continuing. Your father once said something in an interview about how close he felt to you. Many people found the comment unusual. I'm sure he meant no harm. Ivanka's face stiffened. She tried to respond, but the words didn't immediately come. Obama's tone had remained perfectly even respectful, measured, but the meaning beneath it was clear. He wasn't attacking her directly. Instead, he was quietly pointing to the uncomfortable space between pride and denial. The things spoken and unspoken inside her own family that had followed her for years in quiet whispers. Ivanka forced another laugh, but this time it sounded hollow. I don't think that's relevant, she said quickly, glancing toward the moderator. We're here to talk about leadership, not personal comments taken out of context. Obama nodded gently. Of course, he said. But isn't it interesting, Obama added gently, how the personal and the political always find their way back together, especially when we insist they shouldn't. The line landed harder than any insult could have. On the surface, it sounded polite, almost thoughtful, but it left Ivanka with very little space to respond. She had built her argument on family pride and Obama had quietly turned that foundation into a question about boundaries. In truth, the room stayed silent. Cameras kept rolling. Every face in the audience was fixed on her, waiting for what she would say next. Ivanka drew in a slow breath. "My father loves his family," she said firmly. "That's not something I'll ever apologize for." Obama nodded calmly. "Love is never something to apologize for," he replied softly. "But sometimes love can make people blind. When that blindness affects an entire nation, stops being love. It becomes something else." Another heavy silence followed. Ivanka glanced down briefly, then lifted her head again. Her expression was composed, but the color had drained slightly from her face. She wanted to answer him. She wanted to say something clever, something sharp enough to reclaim the moment. But for once, her voice didn't cooperate. Obama leaned back, saying nothing more. Yet the question still lingered in the room like a shadow. "Baron, is your son?" The words echoed in people's minds with a meaning far deeper than the sentence itself. And in that silence, everyone watching could feel it. The balance had shifted completely. The quiet that followed felt like a long breath that never quite ended. No one spoke. No one coughed. No one even shifted in their seats. Obama's question still hung in the air. Twisting through every thought in the room, Ivanka could feel her heartbeat. Pounding in her chest, the confidence she usually carried, the polished calm. That had always acted like armor had begun to crack. She tried to fill the silence with a smile, the kind that had softened tense meetings and awkward interviews. But now it looked fragile. Her mind raced for a way out. She had faced criticism before, tough interviews, political controversies, relentless headlines. But this felt different. Obama's words hadn't been cruel. They were something worse. They were quiet, and quiet words, when delivered at exactly the right moment, could break through anything. The moderator glanced nervously between them, but didn't interrupt. Even he seemed caught in the gravity of the moment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every subtle shift in Ivanka's expression, confusion, frustration, and a faint trace of fear that appears when someone realizes the power of silence. Obama didn't move. He didn't lean forward or back. He simply waited. He had learned long ago that silence could accomplish what arguments often could in revealing the truth without adding another word. The seconds stretched what was only half a minute felt far longer. Ivanka opened her mouth once, but nothing came out. She closed it again and swallowed. The confidence that had filled her voice earlier now felt buried somewhere beneath uncertainty. Finally she spoke, I think. She began, pausing to steady her breath. "I meant earlier is that family gives leaders their purpose. It reminds them who they're fighting for." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. She heard it, so did everyone else. The calm rhythm she had been known for was gone. Obama nodded gently, acknowledging the effort. Then, in that same quiet tone that always made people lean in to listen, he said, "Purpose is good. But purpose without responsibility can be dangerous. It can make people believe they're right simply because they mean well." Ivanka blinked, her face tightening slightly. "I don't think that's what's happening here," she replied, trying to regain her footing. "Maybe not," Obama said. "But that's the risk. When power and family become the same thing, you start protecting your name more than your nation." The sentence landed heavily. There was no anger in it. No accusation. Just a simple truth spoken so plainly it couldn't be ignored. Ivanka's hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to push back, to remind him that she had built her own identity, made her own career, her own accomplishments. But every argument forming in her mind sounded defensive, small, scripted, and the one thing she couldn't afford in that moment was to sound rehearsed. She forced another smile, though frustration slipped into her voice. "I think my father's record speaks for itself," she said quickly. Obama nodded. "It does," he replied calmly. "That's why people are still talking about it." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the audience, not cruel laughter, just enough to break the tension for a moment. Ivanka didn't laugh. She pressed her lips together, realizing something unsettling. every response she gave seemed to circle back toward her. Every defense made her position smaller. Then, unexpectedly, Obama softened his tone. "You know, Ivanka," he said, "being in that spotlight isn't easy. People expect you to defend the people you love. I understand that." Something in the room shifted. His words didn't sound like an attack anymore. They sounded almost like advice. "But sometimes," he continued gently, "loving someone also means having the courage to question them." The line changed the atmosphere. Again, it wasn't harsh. It was human, and somehow that gentleness made it sting even more. Because now the conversation wasn't only about her father, it was about her. Ivanka's eyes dropped for a moment. It's the first clear sign of unease she wanted. To say something strong, something memorable, but her thoughts tangled. Every sentence forming in her mind felt like stepping deeper into quicksand. The moderator finally tried to intervene, letting out a nervous laugh. "Well," he said, "that's certainly a lot too. Think about. Maybe we should move to our next topic." But before he could redirect the conversation, Obama spoke again, calmly, firmly, double quotes. "No," he said. "Leadership isn't a collection of slogans, buildings, or profits," Obama continued. "It's the reflection of the choices you make when no one can stop you. And sometimes family can make those choices harder to see clearly." Ivanka sat motionless as his words settled over the room. The sharp confidence she had carried earlier had faded. All she could do was breathe through the silence that followed. Knowing that anything she said now would likely sound like an excuse, then came the longest quiet of the entire debate. It lasted only half a minute, but it felt endless. 31 seconds of nothing. No applause, no laughter. No argument, just silence. Pure, uneasy silence. And in that stillness, something shifted for everyone watching, both in the studio and at home. The discussion was no longer just about a question or a disagreement. It had become about truth. Obama had done something rare. He had turned the debate into a mirror, and Ivanka, despite all her composure and discipline, had no choice but to see her reflection in it. Finally, she released a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. "Well," she said quietly, almost under her breath, "I suppose everyone has their own definition of leadership." Obama offered a gentle smile. "They do," he replied, "but only one of them stands the test of time." At first, the audience began clapping slowly. Then the sound grew louder, spreading across the room like a wave. Ivanka glanced down briefly before looking up again, forcing a polite smile as the applause filled the studio. She didn't argue. She didn't interrupt, because deep down she understood something in that moment. Those 31 seconds of silence had spoken louder than anything she could say. And as the applause echoed, she realized another truth. Sometimes silence isn't just the end of a debate, it's the sound of someone losing it. When the clapping faded, a different kind of stillness settled over the room, not the tense silence from before, but something softer like the air after a storm. Ivanka remained seated, perfectly composed on the outside, though the calm now felt practiced and fragile, as if one wrong word could break it again. The cameras were still rolling. The moderator tried to move the conversation forward, but everyone's attention remained on her. The energy in the room had changed, and there was no denying who now held it. Barack Obama hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't insulted her. He hadn't even interrupted her. Yet somehow he had taken complete control of the room. Ivanka gave that familiar polished smile, the one she had perfected after years in front of cameras. "I think I've said everything I needed to say," she murmured, her tone light but careful. She adjusted the papers in front of her papers that didn't really need adjusting and slowly stood up. The moderator blinked in surprise. "Are you leaving us, Miss Trump?" he asked. She nodded slightly. "I have another engagement to attend," she replied. But everyone in the room could see the truth in the stiffness of her shoulders and in the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She wanted to leave before another question appeared, before another sentence unraveled what remained of her defenses. Obama didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded in. Acknowledgement, not victory. Thank you for your thoughts. Ivanka, he said calmly. She gave a short nod in return. Almost mechanical, and turned toward the exit. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the echo of her heels tapping against the floor. Each step carried a mixture of pride, embarrassment, and something deeper, the quiet realization that she had been outmatched not by aggression, but by grace. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Obama leaned back slightly and exhaled. The moderator turned to him with a half smile. Well, he said, that was quite an exchange. Obama chuckled softly. Just a conversation, he replied, though sometimes conversations tell us more than we expect. The audience laughed gently, tension finally easing. But beneath that laughter was something else. Respect. People could sense that. What they had witnessed wasn't really about politics or scoring points. It was about composure, about control, about truth. Obama straightened slightly in his chair and addressed the audience in his calm, steady voice. You know, he said, we often say we want the truth. But the truth has a funny way of making people uncomfortable, especially when it comes close to home. He paused briefly. The hardest part isn't hearing the truth, he continued. It's admitting when it's standing right in front of you. The moderator nodded thoughtfully. That's a strong point, he said. Obama went on. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, even when those questions make people uneasy, especially then. The audience listened quietly. His words weren't dramatic or rehearsed. They flowed naturally, yet every sentence landed with precision. He paused again before adding, when power starts to feel like a family heirloom, it stops serving the people and starts protecting itself. That's when nations lose their way. Then he looked out across the audience, and the truth, he said softly, always finds a way to bring them back. It wasn't an attack. He hadn't mentioned anyone by name, but everyone understood exactly what he meant. The moderator smiled, trying to lighten the atmosphere. You always seem to end things on a powerful note, he said. Obama smiled back a small, knowing smile. I just believe words should leave people thinking, not arguing. The audience applauded again louder this time. Not for a clever comeback, but for the quiet conviction behind his words. It wasn't victory through humiliation. It was victory through restraint. Backstage, Ivanka stood in front of a mirror, touching up her makeup with hands that weren't completely steady. Her reflection stared back at her polished, flawless, and deeply tired. She had faced tough interviews before, sharp critics, endless headlines, but she had never encountered someone who could disarm her. Without raising his voice, Obama hadn't cornered her with accusations. He had simply held up a mirror and made her see what she didn't want to see. For the first time, in a long while, she didn't have a prepared line, a clever response, or a talking point to lean on. Instead, those 31 seconds of silence replayed in her mind, back on stage. Obama stood, shook the moderator's hand, and thanked the audience as he walked off. The applause followed him, not loud cheering, but the steady kind of clapping that lingers when people are still thinking, the kind that means they're reflecting. He passed through the same curtain Ivanka had disappeared behind. The hum of the audience still echoed faintly. Someone backstage congratulated him on the discussion. Obama only smiled. It's not about winning, he said quietly. It's about clarity. Outside, the night air was cool. Cameras flashed as he stepped out of the building, but he barely glanced at them. His thoughts were somewhere. It was on something he had once told a group of young leaders. If you have to raise your voice to make your point, he had said, maybe your point isn't strong enough. That night, he had proven it again. Ivanka's departure had said everything words. Cold, her silence, her exit, her carefully maintained smile, all of it told the story of what happens when confidence meets conviction and fails to hold its ground. The debate was over, but the echo of one question would linger long after the camera stopped rolling. Barron, is your son? And in that echo, Obama's calm voice remained, reminding everyone who heard it that real power isn't about dominance. It's about dignity.